I was researching for the Easter message today, and I came across a report based on interviews with over 100,000 churchgoers. And they found that the best way to make today, Easter Sunday, more appealing, and not only that, but more enjoyable for the participants, and, I like this bit, to increase the chance for the Easter crowds to come back next week, they said the pastor should limit the message to 5 minutes or skip it altogether. I would love for all of you, every one of you, to be back right here next Sunday. So I'm pleased to confirm that there's no sermon today.
No donuts for you.
The children got it. What is today? Some are saying shoot. Man, almost got out of that. Today is Resurrection Sunday. However, it's April Fool's. So, you ever wonder who started this whole thing? Who started this whole April Fool hoaxing bit anyway? It's been going on for hundreds and hundreds, as far as I could tell, about 300 years. This thing's been happening on August 1st. But one thing is for sure about April Fools. People are still very gullible, right? They'll buy almost anything. So I looked up some of the best April Fool's pranks that have ever been, given over the past 300 years. And one of them was this true story about the 1957 Swiss spaghetti harvest. It was a real story. They really did put film clips on. I mean, people were believing that spaghetti, did you believe this? Okay. Spaghetti does not grow on trees, just so you know. But one of the other top ones over the past 300 years was the death of John Partridge. Did anybody know John? That's good because he lived around 1708. It would make you very old. But in February of 1708, writing under the pseudonym of Isaac Bickerstaff, Gulliver's Travels author Jonathan Swift published this almanac of fake astrological predictions, like what's going to happen in the next few years. And he was, in the very first prediction he wrote and published, foretold of this death by a raging fever of a celebrity astrologer by the name of John Partridge. And it was going to happen on May 29th at exactly 11 p.m. So Partridge reads this thing, and he gets really infuriated, and he begins to brand Bickerstaff as a fraud. But on March 29th, Swift published a letter confirming that, in fact, Partridge was dead. So on April 1st, what day is that? April Fool's. The joke comes around to fruition when Partridge discovered a guy was knocking at his door. It was a sexton, and he opens up, and the sexton wanted to know what were the parts that he wanted in his memorial service. In other words, you're dead, so we got to have this service figured out. So the guy goes the rest of his life insisting that he wasn't dead. He had to keep proving it over and over and over again, but the hoax played out, forcing him to just, to the day he died, to insist that he actually was John Partridge. So that's a classic April Fool's joke. However, that's just based on 300 years. And if you want to think back, what has been the greatest April Fool's hoax of all time? I think some would say it would have to be the resurrection of Jesus. And a hush fell over the room. Jesus was a first century guy. He actually did live, historically documented to have lived. He led a group of followers. He was crucified by the Romans. He was placed in a borrowed tomb of a wealthy Jewish resident of Jerusalem. And he was purported to have come back from the dead as a living, visible being. And even more than that, he hung around for days. He talked with lots of people. He was seen by hundreds, and then he disappears. without a trace. So, is it April Fool's? Or is it the best day of our lives? Well, that's what I want to talk about today. Some of you who have taken the Alpha course, we tell a few jokes in Alpha, and often I'll tell this particular joke about two boys that were walking home from Sunday school after they had heard a really kind of pulpit-pounding, fire and brimstone sermon about the devil. And so the two are walking along, and one boy turns to the other. He says, what do you think about all this Satan stuff? You really buy this stuff? The other boy replies, well, you know how Santa Claus turned out? It's probably just your dad. You're a little late back here. Come on. Quicker. Checks in the mail. Did you ever see, recently there was a series of movies starring Robert Downey Jr. as Sherlock Holmes. And in one of these movies, the very first one, the story's based around a supposed mystical, almost supernatural figure, and he goes by the name of Lord Blackwood. And Lord Blackwood is killed, and after being declared dead by Holmes's sidekick, who is who? Dr. Watson. He's buried in a tomb. Only later is found that the tomb has been uncovered, the body is gone, and the dead man is seen walking away. The guy goes on to lead a band of cult-like followers in an attempt to bring in a brand new world order. Have you heard this story before? Sounds a little familiar, doesn't it? If you keep watching the movie, spoiler alert, if you haven't already seen it, later you find out that the whole thing is a very sophisticated hoax, where in reality, he never really died. It was just tricks, deception, meant to support the gag. And in the end, it's just an elaborate April Fool's. So I have to just wonder, and it was confirmed by some folks at the first service, is there just a part of us, or has there been a part of us that is just a bit jaded by the Hollywood movies to such a degree as to see, or at least be teased into wondering if this whole Jesus thing about the resurrection from the dead, out of the tomb, appearing to his followers, is just one big, giant, enormous April Fool's gag. Maybe the greatest April Fool's gag that's ever been played. You gotta see the sense of that, because it's a bit hard to figure this stuff out. It's been 2,000 years. The eyewitnesses are long dead and gone. So as you come to worship and we have all this wonderful music and dance and unveiling and all these things, I think you have to come down to a particular question. Are you an April Fool, or is this the greatest day of your life? It's interesting. Many scientists, famous scientists today, are strong proponents of atheism. They're atheist. They just don't buy into the whole religion, God, Jesus thing. However, in the past, and even today, many scientists believe that Jesus actually did rise from death. And just so if you find yourself feeling a bit of an April Fool today, or at least you get a little bit of that going on, I want you to know that there's some good folks that stand with you. In fact, some quite brilliant geniuses that stand with the resurrection. I'm just going to mention a few. Copernicus, Bacon, Kepler, Boyle, Pascal. Robert Boyle lived in the 17th century. He's considered one of the most important figures in the history of chemistry. Some of us know that, but did you know he was a devout Protestant? He was a strong Christian apologist. He actually took special interest in promoting the Christian faith. He wanted to spread it abroad across the world, and so he paid to have the New Testament translated into Scottish and into Turkish so the word would get out. There were others, Newton, Volta, Ampère, Pasteur, Faraday, Gregor Mendel, that's a 19th century fella. He was called the father of modern genetics. But Mendel was also elected abbot of his Augustinian monastery in 1868. And he preached sermons in church, one of which dealt with how Easter represents Christ's victory over death. Brilliant, brilliant people, genius people. And they believed it was true. So I'll come back to the question, is the resurrection of Jesus really the greatest April Fool's ever? Strikingly, those kinds of questions would never have been asked in the ancient world. They never debated Jesus in the resurrection. They never debated whether Jesus was a historical figure. In the earliest literature of the Jewish rabbis, Jesus was actually denounced. They said, yeah, he lived. We didn't like him. And they didn't like him so much, they said he was the illegitimate child of Mary, and he was a bit of a sorcerer because he did these kind of strange magic tricks. So no one really doubted back then. So what is the historical evidence if we're going to talk about April Fools today? What's the historical evidence that Jesus rose from death? One fellow, Dr. Simon Gathercold, he's a professor at the University of Cambridge. He said in this particular lecture, the value of this evidence, meaning the evidence of Jesus' resurrection, is that it's both early and detailed. He says the first Christian writings that talk about Jesus are the epistles of St. Paul, and they were written, and scholars agree, only about 25 years after Jesus had died, at the very latest. And then there's other detailed biographical accounts about Jesus. We know about these in the Gospels, and they date from around 40 years after he died. He goes on to say, these all appeared within the lifetimes of numerous eyewitnesses. And they provided the descriptions that we see in the Gospels. He says it's also hard to believe in the culture of first century Palestine that somebody like Jesus would be held up to such high esteem, even by Jews, because at the time, the whole area was controlled by the Roman Empire. And they disliked the Jews and had great skeptics of Judaism. But there were a few others too. The first author outside the church, it's easy to say, oh, these guys were all believers. But there were some folks outside the church that also mentioned Jesus, the historical figure. Flavius Josephus. I learned about Flavius Josephus on a Holy Land trip, and those that are going back with us, maybe you'll hear the story too. But he was born Joseph ben Matthias. He was a son of a Jewish priest. He actually became a Pharisee. But later on, during the Jewish revolts that led to actually the total destruction of Jerusalem, he became a commander in the Jewish army, and he went up in Galilee, and he was fighting against the Romans, and he actually had to surrender. They were surrounded. He surrendered to Vespasian, offered him, his services. But he also did one other thing. He was I guess this guy was a little bit clever, because he goes, by the way, I'm a Jewish priest, and I just want to let you know, God has spoken to me. God has told me something wonderful about you. You're going to become the next Caesar. You're going to become emperor. So he's feeling pretty good. I'm going to be emperor. Guess what happens? He became emperor. And so somehow mysteriously, Joseph gets accepted into this Roman culture. He changes his name to Flavius Josephus and became a great writer of Jewish history. So there's the background. He wasn't a Christian. He was a Jew. He gets, kind of caught up and becomes a Roman citizen. So he writes a book called The Antiquities of the Jews, and he refers to Jesus. Here's what this Jew says about Jesus. Now, there was about this time, Jesus, a wise man, if it be lawful to call him a man, for he was a doer of wonderful works, a teacher of such men as received the truth with pleasure. He goes on to say, he drew over time both Jews and many Gentiles. He was the Christ. And when Pilate, at the suggestion of the principal men among us, had condemned him to the cross, and he dates this, AD 33, April 3rd, those that loved him at first did not forsake him, for he appeared to them alive again on the third day, April 5th. As the divine prophet had foretold, these and 10,000 other wonderful things concerning him have been recorded, and the tribe of Christians so named for him are not extinct to this day. I guess we could say that's true today, right? We're here in this place. Christianity is not extinct. The tribe is alive and well. I think when you look at all the evidence, you have to say there's no fooling time, is there? There's no fooling historical exploration. There's no fooling scientific discovery, because these things seem to correct errors over time. Given long enough, most errors are corrected, even if they were thought to be universal facts. The ancient world originally believed that the soul of a person was in their stomach. It's probably true for me, but probably not for you. But many people in the ancient world believed the world was what? It's flat. And it got corrected, right? Many people in the ancient world believed that the sun rotated around the earth. The earth was, in fact, the center of the universe. Well, we know today those things, science, given time, and discovery, have disproved them. At least they've proven other things are true. But in all this time, in 2,000 years, we haven't disproven Christ. It seems to only grow stronger. And here's the final proof. This is the biggie of all biggies. Did you know Jesus even appeared on Time magazine? He did. Jesus appeared on Time magazine with a caption. It said this: "The most persistent symbol of peace the world has ever known." So is Jesus for you an idea or a person? A long dead, good, really good teacher? Or is he a risen Lord? One last quote. This is from Tom Wright, Bishop of Durham. He once delivered a lecture about whether scientists can believe in the resurrection, again, going through that whole scientific process. And he says this: "All this brings us face to face with the ultimate question. The empty tomb and the meetings with Jesus are in combination the only possible explanations for the stories and beliefs that grew up so quickly among his followers." He goes on to say, "I have to say that far and away the best historical explanation is that Jesus of Nazareth, having been thoroughly dead and buried, really was raised to life on the third day." He said when people met Jesus, it changed the way they thought. It revealed new knowledge. And he said this explains why Christianity spread so rapidly. So this day, Resurrection Sunday, again leaves us with those two choices. Is it April Fool's, giant hoax day, or is it the best day of our lives? I'm choosing this day not to be an Easter April Fool. I want this to be the best day of my life, and I hope for you. And here's why: because of all the days that the sun in that sky ever rose on our world is the day, the best day, the Son of God rose for our world. Today, on this Resurrection Sunday, I think it's the greatest day in human existence because it's true. Jesus was the Messiah of God, the only person to ever bodily rise from being fully dead and is alive today. Undeniable fact, 2,000 years of history research, modern technology. He's still resurrected. So I want to leave you with a thought. I think today is the best day for every human being on this earth because every human being has a beating heart. And every one of those beating hearts has to receive air. And it's the way our bodies works is you don't breathe in the air of yesterday. You don't breathe the air of tomorrow. Your lungs can only be filled with oxygen, get it into your blood, pumped through your heart by breathing in deeply right now in the next few seconds. So I want us to breathe in deeply the resurrection moment that we celebrate. Live in the extreme of today. It's the best day of your life. Because if Jesus could change the course of human history, he can change us in our world for the better. And that's no fooling. Just something to think about. Amen.